August 2013, Madison Square Garden, New York, the Crossroads Guitar Festival. Eric Clapton was in the second chorus of Layla on the guitar solo, the part that doesn't resolve, the part that reaches for something it can't quite hold, when every light in Madison Square Garden went out, not flickered, not dimmed, went out, all of them. The amplifiers died mid-note, the monitors died, the stage lighting died, the exit signs stayed on, red at the edges, but everything else went black. 18,000 people in sudden complete darkness, and somewhere in the middle of it, an acoustic guitar still moving. Eric Clapton did not stop. The guitar was unplugged. The body of the instrument was producing sound at the volume an acoustic guitar produces in a room that size, almost nothing, a whisper in the direction of 18,000 people who could no longer see the stage. But the strings were moving. The notes were there. Layla was still happening, in the dark, for whoever was close enough to hear it. 40 seconds passed. Then a phone light appeared in the crowd, a single white dot in the darkness, somewhere in the middle distance, then 3 more, then a row, then a section, then another, then the entire floor, then the lower bowl, then the upper tiers, 18,000 phone flashlights going up together until Madison Square Garden stopped being a concert venue and became something else entirely. Drop a comment right now. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and subscribe. Eric Clapton was standing on a dark stage holding an unamplified guitar, and Madison Square Garden looked like the inside of a galaxy. Eric Clapton kept playing. Eric Clapton finished Layla, every note, every phrase, the full arc of the song, for 18,000 lights in the dark. What Eric Clapton said when the power came back and the stage lights returned is the reason this version of Layla is the one people who were there will still be describing to their children. The Crossroads Guitar Festival had been Eric Clapton's project since 2004. The premise was simple and the execution was never simple. Bring together the greatest guitarists alive, put them on one stage, and give the proceeds to the Crossroads Center, the drug and alcohol rehabilitation facility Eric Clapton had founded in Antigua in 1998. The festival had been held 5 times by 2013. It had become, in the 9 years of its existence, something that could not be precisely categorized. Not a concert in the ordinary commercial sense, not a charity event in the ordinary fundraising sense, but a gathering of musicians who had agreed to spend 2 days in the same place playing music together at the highest level they could achieve. The audience that bought tickets understood this. They came to hear things happen that could not be planned or rehearsed. In 2013, the Crossroads Guitar Festival moved to Madison Square Garden for the first time. Previous editions had been held in Dallas, Chicago, and Los Angeles, outdoor venues and large theaters that suited different aspects of what the festival was trying to be. Madison Square Garden was different. It was the center of New York, the room where the biggest events happened, the room that carried the weight of its own history into every performance inside it. The bill that August covered 6 decades of American and British guitar music, players from the Chicago blues tradition, from the British invasion, from the country and rock and jazz crossings of the 1970s and 1980s, and on the final evening as the performer who closed the festival that bore his name, Eric Clapton. Eric Clapton had played Madison Square Garden many times across his career, across 5 decades of visiting New York with various bands and configurations and intentions. Eric Clapton knew the room the way a musician knows a room they have returned to repeatedly. Not the details of the architecture, but the feeling of the air and where the sound went when it left the stage and how the crowd sat in relation to the performance. Madison Square Garden was not an intimate venue. Madison Square Garden was a room designed for scale. August that year was warm in New York. The evening performance had been running for 3 hours by the time Eric Clapton took the stage alone for the closing set. 3 hours of musicians who had spent their lives playing guitar, performing at the level that only comes when a musician is playing alongside other musicians they respect enormously. The crowd of 18,000 had been given a great deal by the time Eric Clapton walked out. They were warm and attentive and full and ready for one more thing. Eric Clapton's set ran through 12 songs. Each one carried something specific. A blues piece, a song from the Cream years, a newer piece from the solo catalog, a collaboration at the piano with a guest. The crowd was with every note. The sound was good. The night was doing what the Crossroads Festival was designed to do, produce music that could not quite be produced anywhere else. Layla was the 13th song. Eric Clapton had been playing Layla since 1970. In 43 years, Eric Clapton had played the song more times than Eric Clapton had counted, in more contexts than any single song is designed to survive. The full Derek and the Dominoes version with the double guitar and Duane Allman, recorded in 1970 in Criteria Studios in Miami. The extended live versions of the 1970s and 1980s stretched into 20-minute explorations at venues like the Forum and Madison Square Garden itself. The famous unplugged acoustic version from 1992, the version that a generation of listeners had heard first, slower and quieter and in some ways more exposed without the original's armor. Each version had been its own thing. Each version had found something different in the same chord progression, the same descending opening riff, the same reaching quality in the melody that had never been quite satisfied across 4 decades of attempts to resolve it. What version Eric Clapton played at Crossroads depended on the night and the feeling and what the band was doing. That August night, it was the full arrangement, band in, full electric, the riff as it was designed to be played, large and patient and inevitable. The riff came out of the opening, and the crowd recognized it immediately, and the recognition moved through 18,000 people the way a wave moves through water. Not a wave of noise, a wave of attention, of arrival, of here it is. Even people who had heard the song 1,000 times sat forward slightly, even people who had heard Eric Clapton play it live before. The first verse went through without incident, the second verse. The song moved into the chorus, and the chorus resolved, and the guitar solo opened up. The extended instrumental section, the part that stretches after the main body of the song ends and allows the melody to be examined and turned over and found to be deeper than the verses suggested. This was the section that took time. This was the section where Layla stopped being a song about a specific person and became something more general, a sound that grief and desire make when they have been simplified into music. It was 40 seconds into this section that the power went out. Marcus Webb, the stage manager for the Crossroads Festival that year, was in the production wing on the left side of the stage. Marcus had been managing stages for 17 years and had experienced power failures at outdoor festivals, at smaller venues, twice at theaters. He had not experienced a power failure at Madison Square Garden during a headline performance. The failure was total, not a partial outage, not a section of the grid. Everything feeding the stage had gone simultaneously. The source, investigated afterward over 2 days by the venue's engineering team, was a fault in a secondary distribution panel that had triggered a cascade failure across the main stage power system. It took 6 minutes to restore. Marcus did not know it would take 6 minutes. Standing in the dark at the side of the stage, Marcus did not know how long it would take. Eric Clapton, at center stage, stopped for 1 second when the power died. In that second, Eric Clapton registered the absence of the monitors, the absence of the amplification, the complete darkness in every direction. Then Eric Clapton resumed playing. The notes that came out of the guitar body in the dark were the notes that would have been amplified if the amplification were working. They were the right notes. They were in the right place in the song. They were at a volume that reached perhaps the first 2 or 3 rows of the floor section, barely at the edge of audibility. To the 18,000 people beyond those first rows, there was darkness and the shape of a person standing on a dark stage, and, if they were listening very carefully, something that might be a guitar. 40 seconds of this. The woman who turned on her phone first was sitting in section 104, row 12, toward the center of the floor. She was in her early 30s, had driven from Brooklyn that morning with her husband and his sister, had been to the 2007 and 2010 Crossroads festivals, and had said before leaving the apartment that morning that this year was the one she had been most excited about. The lineup, the venue, the sense that this edition of the festival was going to be different. She had not been wrong about that, though the way it would be different was not what she had anticipated. When the power died and the darkness settled, she had experienced the same 10 seconds of suspended confusion that 18,000 other people experienced, the specific moment between something unexpected happening and the mind finding a category for it. Then the category had arrived. Eric Clapton is still playing. She had taken her phone from her pocket and turned on the flashlight and held it up above her head, not with any deliberate strategy, just with the instinct that the person who was still playing deserved to be seen by something. The people around her saw the light and understood immediately what it meant and turned on their own. In the next 30 seconds, the lights spread out from section 104 in every direction simultaneously, not one at a time, but in bursts, dozens at once. The floor, then the lower bowl, then the upper deck, the balconies, every section, every level, until the darkness of Madison Square Garden was replaced by something that had no name in the context of concerts. 18,000 white phone lights in the dark, still, not moving, pointed at the stage. Eric Clapton looked up from the guitar. The expression on Eric Clapton's face at this moment was captured by a photographer in the press section working on a long-exposure camera that could collect the available light in the room. The photograph showed a man standing in darkness at the center of a black stage, the guitar on a strap across his shoulder, face lifted and directed out at the audience, surrounded in every direction by 18,000 points of light. The photograph was shared widely after the festival. People who had not been there saw it and understood something about what had happened. People who had been there saw it and said it was accurate. Eric Clapton looked at the lights for 4 seconds, then Eric Clapton went back to the guitar. The section of Layla that Eric Clapton was playing when the power died had 15 bars remaining. Eric Clapton played all 15 bars, unamplified, to the constellation of 18,000 lights. The music reached only the first rows in any recognizable form. But 18,000 people were watching and holding their lights steady, and the guitarist at the center of the stage was playing for all of them. And the connection between the performance and the audience was not carried by the sound, but by something the sound had already given them over the previous 40 minutes and the previous 43 years. When the last note was finished, the power came back. The stage lights returned in sections. First the back wall, then the front rigs, then the floor monitors came alive, and the amplifiers began their reboot sequence. It took 12 seconds for everything to fully restore. During those 12 seconds, Madison Square Garden was slowly lit, the phone lights still up, the stage lights coming back, the two light sources meeting in the middle of the venue for a moment. The crowd was on its feet, all 18,000. They had been standing since the phone lights began, and they were still standing. Eric Clapton stood at the restored microphone. Eric Clapton stood at the restored microphone. The crowd was already on its feet. The phone lights were still up, held by people who had not yet made the decision to lower them. Eric Clapton said, "I have been playing Layla for 43 years. Tonight is the first time I heard it back." The crowd did not immediately respond. The crowd sat with the sentence for 30 seconds, not as an audience waits before applauding, but as people wait when they have heard something true and need a moment to let it settle in the right place. Then the response came. And the response was what the responses at Madison Square Garden are when 18,000 people agree on something at the same time. Marcus Webb found Eric Clapton 40 minutes after the end of the show in the production corridor at the back of the venue. Marcus had spent the 6-minute power outage in the wings running through every contingency the stage management team had prepared for, which did not include the specific contingency of the headlining act continuing to perform unamplified in total darkness while the audience responded by turning the venue into a light installation. Marcus had spent the subsequent 40 minutes managing the restoration of the power and the end of the show and the movement of 18,000 people toward the exits, all of which had proceeded without incident because what had happened during the power outage had, inexplicably, produced a crowd that was in the best possible state of mind for the end of an evening. Marcus told Eric Clapton that he was sorry for the failure and that the venue's engineering team had already provided a full technical report and that the specific fault that had caused the outage had been corrected. Eric Clapton listened to this. Then Eric Clapton said, "Don't apologize for it. You gave me 18,000 lights." The Crossroads Guitar Festival has been held twice since 2013. At both editions, when Layla is discussed in the context of Eric Clapton's performances, the 2013 Madison Square Garden version is the one that comes first. Not because it was technically the best version. The power outage meant the recorded audio from the board was incomplete for the middle section. But because what happened when the power went out and came back, and what was said into the microphone afterward, is not something that gets recorded by a board. The photograph from section 104 still exists. It has been reproduced in music publications and in several books. In it, Eric Clapton is a small, dark figure at the center of a stage surrounded by 18,000 points of light. The caption in most places where it has been printed says, "Crossroads Guitar Festival, Madison Square Garden, August 2013. Subscribe. Leave a comment with where you first heard Layla. the version, the year, and what you were doing when it found you. Come back next week. More stories from here.